Nueva York. I just want to mention that just a few days ago, President Trump declared without any congressional authorization, basically no-fly zone in Venezuela. Several airplanes, commercial airplanes in Venezuela have been facing some issues when they fly in the space area of Venezuela. As a consequence, a huge amount of airlines have suspended the flight over the Venezuelan territory, and they have canceled, and hundreds of people have been unable to go back to their country. People that wanted to be in vacation in Venezuela, people that wanted to be in Venezuela to show solidarity to the Bolivarian revolution, they were unable to get to Venezuela. This is some kind of terrorist attack against the Bolivarian revolution. And the idea of this press conference is basically to denounce everything that has been happening in the last few weeks, and to make sure that people will be able to go to Venezuela without any threat coming from the State Department and from Marco Rubio, basically. We want to denounce them, and we want to pay close attention to everything that they have done and everything that they could be doing in the next weeks against the Bolivarian revolution and his people. So we are here in solidarity, and thank you very much again to everybody to be with us all today. Thank you. I think.
Greetings, and thank you, William Camacro. Greetings to the People's Assembly for Peace and Sovereignty in our Americas. We're speaking today as those who were delegates to this People's Assembly, where thousands were invited from across the world, and especially from the Caribbean and all of the Americas, prevented from traveling by the U.S. declared no-fly zone. So we're here in solidarity. Very few of the delegates were able to travel, but overwhelmingly, the great majority of those who were invited as delegates have been prevented from traveling. And this is just the latest of a continuing attack. The no-fly zone, very much as we've seen with the horrific attacks on small boats, totally defenseless, even what they call the double tap. All of this is total lawlessness on an international scale. It's important that we address it, we acknowledge it, we challenge it from here in the U.S., this violation of U.S. law and international law. Just speaking personally, as Sara Flounders from International Action Center, from the Sanctions Kill campaign over many years, talking about the impact of U.S. sanctions, from Workers' World, we consider this really a crime against humanity, meaning the systematic targeting of civilian populations to intentionally create trauma on a large scale. Since the Nuremberg Conventions, Article 6 explicitly prohibits attacks on civilian populations that cause suffering, death, or trauma on a large scale. And that is what the attacks, whether on small boats throughout the Caribbean and also in the Pacific, and now the shutdown of even transport within Venezuela, are intended to do, to create trauma in the civilian population, to in every way cut back on what's needed for a healthy life for the population. So today we're asking several lawyers to address this question, these violations, and what it is that we want to examine and to challenge in terms of U.S. lawlessness, as I say, in domestic law and in international law. We first want to hear from Suzanne Adali, who is president of the National Lawyers Guild and also a part of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, and very well able to speak on this. So, Suzanne.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, William. I just want to start by saying that in addition to being president of the National Lawyers Guild, I'm one of the co-chairs of the International Committee, which is the part of the National Lawyers Guild that has been most active in solidarity with Venezuela and other movements around the world. I myself have traveled to Venezuela 5 different occasions. The first in 2006, on a couple of occasions to act as an election observer. On one occasion as part of an international delegation looking at the impact of economic sanctions. Every single trip that I've taken to Venezuela has been an inspiration. It has been education. It has been a lesson and a model in a revolutionary process, in socialism, in people's movements. And I think that that's frankly what every U.S. administration since the Bolivarian Revolution began is afraid of. And that's, we are talking about today's very sort of serious sort of escalation of the aggression against Venezuela, kind of in the backdrop of several years of aggression against Venezuela on the Bolivarian project. I prepared a statement which is very brief, but be happy to answer any questions that people might have today or later. On behalf of the National Lawyers Guild and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, I extend solidarity greetings to our friends, colleagues, and comrades in Venezuela. For over 20 years, the NLG and the IADL have tried to use their platforms to expose how the United States has been attempting to destroy the Bolivarian Revolution in furtherance of its imperialist and capitalist interests. We have seen Venezuela withstanding years of regime change efforts, including decades of criminal economic sanctions, the demonization of their leaders, Presidents Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, the denial and delegitimization of the inspiring People's Bolivarian Project, and countless violations of Venezuelan sovereignty. To not have the opportunity to be with you today, I was supposed to take part in the delegation that was ready to travel this week. And so as part of that delegation, but also as part of a national but also global progressive legal movement, I want to, on behalf of myself and the organizations I work with, condemn Trump's actions in Venezuela, including the actions they took that prevented us from being with you today, and express our unwavering solidarity. On November 29th, President Trump declared, without congressional approval or UN authorization or any legal authority, that Venezuelan airspace should be considered closed in its entirety. Almost immediately, pilots began reporting GPS interference and navigation and signal disruptions while approaching Caracas International Airport. Aviation analysts note that such disruptions mirror electronic warfare tactics that the U.S. has deployed in advance of military operations in other regions, including in the Middle East. The resulting climate of uncertainty triggered cascading flight suspensions and widespread anxiety among travelers, with at least 75% of international flights to Venezuela canceled as a result. For thousands of Venezuelans abroad, these disruptions have produced a humanitarian crisis for families attempting to return home for Christmas, stranded in airports from Madrid to Panama City. Elderly passengers have gone days without assistance, and many travelers have been forced to reroute through Bogota and across the Cucuta Cucuta on foot just to reach Venezuelan territory. In response, the Venezuelan government has mobilized state-owned aircraft to assist stranded citizens and ensure reunification during the holiday season. We see these travel restrictions as a deliberate attempt to disrupt international solidarity, particularly at this important time. NLG International, the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, and the American Association of Jurists, who we work closely with, are committed to conducting a thorough and focused analysis of the law to challenge the illegal no-fly zone and other acts of aggressions and violations of international law in domestic, regional, and international courts. The National Lawyers Guild and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers have also condemned U.S. military presence off the coast of Venezuela and the bombing and boarding of fishing vessels as illegal acts of war and military attacks on the civilian population. Since September, the U.S. has carried out at least 22 declared military strikes without producing any legal basis for doing so. Just yesterday, a handful of human rights organizations based in New York who are part of our larger sort of network of progressive lawyers and legal advocates have filed a lawsuit demanding that the Office of Legal Counsel, which counsels the executive branch, which counsels the Trump administration, produce their legal basis for these strikes. However, I think we could all agree that whatever information that the Trump administration might, we expect for them to continue to not respond to those requests. However, we think that any sort of justification they might produce, it will still really never be a justification in the eyes of the law, of the eyes of anyone with any morality whatsoever. We saw the devastation and the impact of these strikes with our own eyes as they have kind of appeared live streamed on the news. The order by Donald Trump for the deliberate sinking of foreign civilian vessels in international waters and the deliberate killing of civilians on board and the justification of these numbers by Secretary of Defense Hegseth and Secretary of State Rubio constitute violations of the United States War Powers Act, Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Geneva Conventions, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and the UN Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms by Law Enforcement Officials, as well as customary international law. Furthermore, the ordering or waging of war without a declaration of war by Congress and in violation of U.S. treaty obligations constitutes an impeachable offense on the part of the responsible officials. All of these developments come after 23 years of direct U.S. involvement in coups and coup attempts in Venezuela, routine interference in Venezuelan elections, which the NLG has also reported about, the imposition of unlawful unilateral coercive measures designed to impoverish the Venezuelan people, the arrest and detention of Venezuelan diplomats, the unlawful confiscation of Venezuelan assets held in foreign banks, and prior attempted landings by U.S. mercenaries in Venezuela. We want to remind the international community of their own obligations and the UN officials of their own obligations. We must act as a nation and as a global community to stop U.S. aggression against Venezuela and to put a stop to these illegal actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne Adali with the National Lawyers Guild. And we next want to hear from Drea Summers with the New York chapter of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, reading a statement.
Peace, everyone. I'm here to read the official statement from the National Conference of Black Lawyers. So NCBL joins both domestic and international organizations in denouncing and condemning the Trump administration's covert actions and threats of using armed force against Venezuela. We agree, the United Nations, experts, and other organizations, that these coercive interventions in Venezuela by the United States violate the country's sovereignty and the United Nations Charter. Whereas Article 2, Section 4 of the Charter asserts all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Furthermore, the High Commission for Human Rights indicts with the ICCPR the threat of use and force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, country, and any attempt to impose regime change by external means also infringes upon the right of self-determination as recognized in Article 1 of the ICCPR, ratified by the United States in 1992. It is outrageous that since August 2025, the authoritarian regime of Donald Trump, under the guise of allegedly stopping drug cartel interdictions in the international waters, has authorized the military to carry out at least 21 bombing strikes against boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. These interdictions have resulted in the extrajudicial killings of at least 83 people, including 2 people who were murdered on September 2nd, 2025, under the authority of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who commanded military personnel to kill everybody on board after 2 people survived the bomb attacks of the sinking vessel. The Trump administration has yet to provide credible evidence to justify these heinous crimes on high seas. In addition, even the United States and the international intelligence assessments have not provided any evidence that Venezuela is a major source of drugs that enter the United States. As the United States has carried out numerous global assaults against the sovereignty of nations, including those in the region, we have experience with these types of bullying tactics, such as regime change strategies and coercive economic measures which ignore the norms and core values of international law. NCBL, throughout its history, has championed both domestic and international struggles against U.S. imperialism. NCBL is aware of the United States' long history of interventions in Latin America. Therefore, it supports the Bolivarian revolutionary government and peoples of Venezuela in their struggles against all assaults by the United States. NCBL encourages its members to join the demonstrations in their areas in opposition to this internationally condemned violation in the sovereignty of Venezuela. NCBL joins other organizations to demand the Congress of the United States fully investigate Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and all orders issued have resulted in the deaths of people in international waters surrounding Venezuela. NCBL further demands that the Congress make the report public. Further, if the results of the investigation suggest that these crimes may have been committed, the report shall be provided to the appropriate prosecutorial office. NCBL encourages its members to share this resolution and urge others to support the Venezuelan people against the internationally condemned actions of the United States government. Thank you.
Thank you, Drea Summers, the New York chapter of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. We next will hear from Roger Wareham, also of the National Conference of Black Lawyers and the December 12th movement. Roger Wareham.
Good afternoon. As Sara set out, I am a member of the December 12th Movement International Secretariat, as well as the National Conference of Black Lawyers. I just want to make a couple of comments. I join in with the statements from Drea and from Suzanne in terms of my sister organizations. The December 12th movement has always, over the last 2 decades, supported the Bolivarian Revolution and the leadership of President Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. And we have always condemned the 2 decades long attempt of the United States to effect regime change. And that's their goal is to remove anyone or anything that's an obstacle to the oil reserves that they want. And so these latest examples of what they're willing to do are just a reflection of a continuing campaign, and that the objective is to effect regime change. It's as Kissinger said in 1973, I believe it was, when they enacted the same type of campaign in Chile. It was to make the economy scream. It was to create conditions that would be so onerous for the masses of people that it will seem as if they're doing as of their own to get rid of the regime. They haven't succeeded. There've been many different tactics they've employed, including the coup d'etat against President Chavez, the attempted kidnapping of President Maduro, the sanctions, the unilateral coercive sanctions, which is the real driving force in terms of creating those conditions. And then we've had recently just the cold-blooded murder of civilians on the high seas. And the latest that we've experienced now is the question of the United States saying that they have the authority to shut down the airspace over a sovereign and independent country. And then, of course, they're not admitting to it, enacting the type of measures that they've just talked about in terms of GPS and interference with navigation, which are going to lead airlines to not fly in there, which had the effect that was set out by Willie in terms of the effect it's had on native Venezuelans, people in terms of traveling, of people who are intermediate traveling. All those type of effects are really what we would call the cold-blooded calculations of human rights and war crimes commissioners and human rights violators to get what they want. And so we certainly join and will participate in the legal activities on the national, regional, and international. We've had some experience with that, and it's I don't know if it's ironic or appropriate that today is International Human Rights Day, and we're dealing with criminals who have no respect for human rights. But we're going to demand that they be enforced. The December 12th movement goes back to 1989 in terms of our regular dealings with the United Nations, the human rights bodies in Geneva. In 2009, we worked with the Association of International Democratic Lawyers and NLG. We did after the U.S. engineer coup in Honduras, we went and did a report on that. And then about 13 years ago, we took a petition to the International Criminal Court against NATO and the Western countries for what they had done in terms of Libya, what France had done in terms of Cote d'Ivoire. So there's a history with that, and we'll just have to push all the buttons. But I think the real important part, on one hand, is the expression of solidarity. Countries which are under siege, you cannot underestimate the impact it has on morale to know that there are people outside their country who are concerned with what's going on. I come from a community that remembers what support Venezuela supplied to our communities, particularly back in the early 2000s when people could not afford heating oil. They were freezing, and they were the residents of a country which is free and democratic and capitalist, and they could not afford oil for their heating. And Venezuela supplied free or low-cost heating in black and brown communities around the country. When Katrina devastated black communities in New Orleans and in the surrounding areas, and President Bush's position and the head of FEMA's position was sort of like, oh, this is by the by. The disaster that fell on the people in the area was not Katrina so much as the man-made disaster and failure to prepare or to repair what had happened after Katrina. So we remember that, and we respect that. I know 7 years ago, Venezuela had in their support of the first international decade for people of African descent. They held an international gathering to celebrate that and also to support the demand of African people for reparations, whereas some of us who came from the United States are in a country which won't even recognize that or do anything about that. So all of that speaks to the question of international solidarity, and that we of the December 12th movement, we're not there today, although we were supposed to be there. We're not there today, but we want you to know that we got your back. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger Wareham. Next, we're going to hear from Margaret Kimberley with the Black Alliance for Peace, with the Black Alliance for Peace.
Thank you. All right. Greetings, everyone. I'm, as Sara said, I'm Margaret Kimberley. In addition to being on the coordinating committee of the Black Alliance for Peace, I'm also editor of Black Agenda Report, which is published today. Wednesday is Black Agenda Report Day. One of our we have 3 national co-coordinators of the Black Alliance for Peace, was attempting to reach Caracas in order to attend this assembly, but due to the issues that we've been talking about, the U.S. Preventing people from traveling, unfortunately, was not able to arrive. In both of these hats I wear, I have, and my comrades have, always advocated for the rights of the Venezuelan people to live free from U.S. aggression, to their fighting for their rights to self-determination. They have the right to determine how they live, who will govern them, what kind of state they will have. And I'm probably preaching to the choir, but the issue isn't what the U.S. said about Chavez or what they now say about Maduro. The issue is what the people there want for themselves. We've seen in the last few years thousands of Venezuelans come to the U.S. because the U.S. destroyed their economy through sanctions, economic coercive measures, and now cruelly kicked them out after making their lives, thank you, making their lives so miserable. We've talked about international law, that the Trump administration doesn't have the right to decide, to make any determinations about Venezuela's airspace or any other country's airspace, and that is true. But in the absence of international law being respected, and I hate to say this, it actually doesn't matter what international law is. If the United States, and let us not be so Trump-centric that we act as though this is the first assault on the rights of the Venezuelan people or people all over the world. Let us remember during the Obama administration, they called it the kill list. They bragged about it. They had, and this double tap, we've been hearing a lot, and I have mixed feelings about it. It's good that we know in this first airstrike on a boat off the coast of Venezuela, there were survivors, and an order was given to kill them as well. Well, the double tap isn't new, and it was practiced by the Obama administration in places like Somalia and Yemen. So I just want, I want to remind folks about that. I was fortunate to visit Venezuela in 2023. I was a part of a delegation, the International People's Tribunal on U.S. Imperialism, Sanctions, Blockades, and Economic Coercive Measures, a long title. But I was fortunate enough to go and see for myself the impact of Venezuela being unable to conduct transactions financially, the impact on healthcare, medical equipment lacking, medicines lacking. And we know one study showed that at least 40,000 people were killed in just 1 year during the first Trump administration. It was there that I learned the U.S. was going to auction off Citgo. Roger mentioned Venezuela's assistance to people here in getting heating their homes. Well, the U.S. just auctioned off Citgo. They had the opposition go to court and claim that it was theirs. And so they want to invade militarily and steal oil, but they made sure they did that beforehand. And this is an attack on the entire region. It's not just an attack on Venezuela. This is the people, instead of the Monroe Doctrine, are calling it the Donroe Doctrine, but it's been U.S. Foreign policy for 200 years that the U.S. owns the entire hemisphere and can do whatever they want to do. And one of the things they want to do is to not just strangle the economy of Venezuela or Cuba, but to tell these countries, you cannot be independent of the U.S. You can't be friends with China or Russia or any other country of your choosing. It's a way to steal the oil. It's a way to get rid of a socialist government. It's a way to control the entire region. And even countries that have been friendly to the United States are being forced into taking part in this aggression. Guyana, which is next door to borders Venezuela, they have an old border dispute that goes back to colonial times. And the U.S. has forced Guyana, although some forces in those countries go along happily, or Trinidad. Trinidad and Tobago is just a few miles away from Venezuela. Or Grenada. What an irony for this country that the U.S. attacked 40 years ago when they tried to show self-determination, installing radar in that country. But I want to talk also about the lies that are very simple. We've talked about these little boats and how they can't get to the U.S. This is something very basic. The closest U.S. territory to Venezuela is Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands, 500 miles away. The only way these little boats, assuming they did really have drugs, to get even 500 miles away would be to refuel constantly. I haven't heard anything about this. The corporate media doesn't say anything. Democrats don't say anything, as well as Republicans not saying anything. So we have to be, and I'm again preaching to the choir, be anti-imperialist in our outlook. And I'm going to close. I went over, sorry about that. We published a statement in Black Agenda Report from the Afro-Venezuelans Organizations Network and the Regional Articulation of Afro-Descendants of Latin America and the Caribbean, and they are committed to fighting for their rights. And they say, and I quote, "We call upon the noble people of the United States to halt these aggressions. We also call on sovereign governments in the Caribbean and Latin America to stop the attacks led by Donald Trump and his mafia. We call on Afro-descendant peoples, communities, and social movements to mobilize in solidarity with our people to denounce the false U.S. narrative, false U.S. narrative of a war on drug trafficking and to stop the march towards war," end quote. And that is how I will end my remarks. They are calling on us to do what we can to be in solidarity with them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret Kimberley with Black Agenda Report and the Black Alliance for Peace. We're next going to hear from Corinna Mullin, who is a member of the U.S. Peace Council and the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective, and really was instrumental in organizing today's efforts and also was a delegate to Venezuela.
Thank you, Sara, and thanks to all the comrades who have spoken already. Like Margaret, I also was in Venezuela and Suzanne and other comrades as part of the International People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism, sanctions, blockades, and unilateral coercive measures. And I also was there 2 summers ago for the elections as an election observer, and like Suzanne, have just been constantly inspired by the courage, the steadfastness, the creativity of the Venezuelan people and state in continuing to consolidate and build the Bolivarian socialist revolution in the face of such brutal U.S. imperialist aggression. So I want to say greetings to everyone here and also to our Venezuelan comrades and to all who are attending the People's Assembly for Peace and Sovereignty in our Americas in Caracas. We send our deepest solidarity from here in the belly of the beast, and of course we're so sorry we couldn't be there with you in person, but we are absolutely there with you in spirit. As Sara said, my name is Corinna Mullin. I'm speaking today on behalf of the U.S. Peace Council. I was scheduled to be one of the several members of the delegation traveling to Caracas to join this historic gathering. Yet because of the U.S. government's unlawful airspace blockade and the reported electronic interference in the airspace, only one of our delegates has been able to enter the country. Adrian Pine, who is a U.S. Peace Council member and a steering committee member of the Venezuelan Solidarity Network and coordinator of Friends of the Hague Group. She sends her revolutionary greetings from Caracas today. A majority of our delegation, as we've heard, was prevented from traveling for one reason alone, because the U.S. government is attempting to block international solidarity and to punish Venezuela for asserting its control over its natural resources and its sovereignty. We stand in solidarity with the Bolivarian socialist revolution and with the Venezuelan people resisting U.S. imperialist aggression. On November 29th, as we've heard, the Trump administration illegally declared Venezuelan airspace closed in its entirety, an act of war executed without congressional approval, without UN authorization, and in flagrant violation of international law. This declaration was immediately followed by widespread reports of GPS disruptions and navigation interference consistent with U.S. electronic warfare tactics historically used in prior imperialist military operations. Within days, 75% of all international flights to Venezuela were suspended, creating a humanitarian crisis that left thousands of Venezuelans, many trying to return home for the holiday season, stranded from Madrid to Panama. At the very moment Washington escalates its aggression, the Venezuelan people are responding with greater unity and popular organization. President Maduro recently declared a communal transition government towards socialism, a popular and neighborhood power. Across the country, productive and administrative functions are being shifted directly to the people through territorial self-government units linked to communal councils, deepening Chavez's historic mandate of commune or nothing. As U.S. sanctions and blockades attempt to strain centralized state functions, the communes are strengthening, and mobilization is continuing across the country, demonstrating that Venezuela's response to imperialist pressure is not submission, but the consolidation of organized socialist popular power. Our delegation, which includes dozens of peace, justice, and anti-imperialist organizations, was prepared to stand shoulder to shoulder with our comrades from across the global South. The U.S. government acted to prevent this expression of solidarity. Of course, the attempted no-fly zone is only the latest chapter in a decades-long campaign of U.S. imperialist violence against Venezuela. From multiple failed coup attempts, including the 2002 U.S.-backed coup against Chavez, to the backing of astroturfed opposition figures like Juan Guaido and Maria Corina Machado, to the 2020-linked Operation Gideon plot to kidnap Maduro, to the attacks on the boats off of Venezuela that Margaret was talking about, and the ongoing economic warfare, illegal sanctions regime, and multiple attempts of political destabilization. And of course, we know Venezuela is not alone. This is part of a wider attack, a global pattern of U.S. imperialists lashing out, a dying U.S. imperialist-led order. trying to, salvage what it can. And of course, this includes the ongoing U.S. imperialist settler colonial genocide in Gaza, the increasing attacks on the region, including Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, the proxy wars and destabilization, the decades old genocidal blockade and economic war on Cuba, threats and provocations across the Caribbean, the U.S.-backed occupation and centuries of imperialist intervention in Haiti, AFRICOM's ongoing militarization of the African continent, the imperialist plunder of the DRC, and of course the imperialist base expansion and containment strategies targeting China, the US-backed genocide in Sudan. It's all one system, one architecture of domination. And as Ajamu Baraka of the Black Alliance for Peace has warned, Washington's greatest fear is not a plane landing in Caracas, it is the unity of people's movements across the Americas and the world. And that fear is justified because despite the propaganda and despite the lies, the people of this country are not convinced. 70% of US residents oppose a war on Venezuela, and the people recognize the war abroad is inseparable from the war at home. The same U.S. government that blockades Venezuela, expands the racist carceral state and policing and colonial gentrification of our communities, enacts brutal ICE raids and mass deportations, continues to dispossess indigenous nations of their land and sovereignty here in Turtle Island, expands cop cities and domestic surveillance as part of the fascist project of pacification, criminalizes dissent, especially Black, Brown, immigrant, Muslim, and working class communities, and cuts public spending for vital programs and starves our public institutions while pouring billions into weapons manufacturers. It's the same imperialist logic that bombs boats off the coast of Venezuela, that is the same logic that evicts families, cages migrants, suppresses the student intifada, and unleashes militarized police on our streets. The struggle against U.S. imperialism is the struggle for racial justice, class struggle, and liberation at home. So today, we say clearly, hands off Venezuela, end the sanctions, end the blockades, venceremos. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinna Mullin. And along with those of us who've spoken who had planned to be in Venezuela today, with the People's Assembly for Peace and Sovereignty in our Americas. There are several other folks here today who were part of this delegation who we're going to hear from next. We really want to assert our solidarity with Venezuela. This is a powerful force, not only here in the U.S., but internationally. Those who stand with Venezuela in their attempt for development for all the people, not just for a few rich billionaires here in the U.S. So we're next going to hear from Abdullah from the Sudanese Resistance Front and the Palaver Collective, and then we'll hear from a couple of the other delegates who had wanted to join us today.
Peace, y'all. I'm gonna keep it real short and sweet, especially since every single person who spoke before me has laid it out very clearly. I do not want to take away from the main point, which is we stand in solidarity with the Venezuelan people, with all of those who are facing imperialist aggression globally. And primarily, we stand with all of those who are fighting for self-determination and sovereignty. I'm part of an organization called the Palaver Collective, which is a Pan-African socialist organization fighting against imperialism in the belly of the beast. Alongside that, I'm part of the Sudanese Resistance Front, which is a Sudani anti-imperialist formation dedicated to organizing Sudanese people against imperialism and for self-determination and sovereignty. We signed up for this delegation with one purpose, to stand with the Venezuelan people, and out of the inspiration that we've gotten from the Bolivarian revolution as a whole, we see that revolution as one of the beacons of hope in terms of people's resilience against the biggest beast known to man. The United States is the greatest facilitator of terrorism globally. And this is a point that we should not forget, because they yap a lot about peace. They really do. They assign a Nobel Peace Prize to Maria Machado, who, yeah, I know she's a bozo, but specifically, the other day, she goes on TV to discredit completely Hugo Chavez's legacy, the developments of the PSUV and the Venezuelan people, and calls for a return to tradition in terms of returning back to Venezuela before Chavez. Since Chavez, Venezuela went from something along the lines of 70% of people being in poverty to 20%, from 40% of people being in extreme poverty to 7%. Even in current moment, with the greatest threat of imperialist aggression against them, after the continued one of just sanctions over the span of, even with the continued threat of imperialist aggression coming from the United States right now, with the continued attacks from the United States on the people of Venezuela, you see on one hand, Maduro and the PSUV doubling down on the transition and the development of socialism, the development of their people, and full national unity. We wanted to stand in solidarity with that. One of our comrades is there right now. Shout out to Yasmin from the Palaver Collective. She will be reporting back, taking the experiences from the masses of people that are there and presenting it back to the people over here, because we understand one thing very clearly. Straight up, we show solidarity not because we're there to show up for people, but we're showing up with people. The aggression on the Venezuelan people is the same as the aggression of the Sudanese people. It's the same as the aggression on the people that are found in any place of the globe, including here, even in the belly of the beast. So with that being said, stay with Venezuela, hands off of Venezuela, the U.S. out of everywhere, and join an organization fighting against imperialist aggression. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. We're next going to hear from Jonas King from Brooklyn with MASS, Mutual Aid, Scientific Socialism, that organizes community outreach.
How y'all doing? Some of y'all might know me as Yoya. I represent MASS, Mutual Aid, Scientific Socialism. And we organize in Kensington, Brooklyn against ICE, against the ICE raids. We organize food distros, and we organize political education. My apologies. I regret to not be in Caracas right now participating in the delegation, but that being said, we know that solidarity has nothing to do with a geographical location. It has everything to do with identifying with a class and identifying with an anti-imperialist analysis of the world. So I'm happy to be still speaking here and participating in the way that I can. Abusive alcoholic, this guy Pete Hegseth, he accurately renamed the Department of Defense to the Department of War. But we say that he should take it one step further and name it the Department of Terrorism, because while our friends on the street face bitter cold, our friends in the shelters face neglect and poor conditions, the working class faces worsening affordability crises. The U.S. government is using our money to send troops to the coast of Venezuela, bombing fishing and civilian boats, and continuing aggression in an effort to violently coup Maduro to steal nationalized resources from the Venezuelan people. And not only to steal resources, but to kill the Venezuelan solidarity with decolonial movements worldwide and their deepening ties with the new emerging multipolar world order. The United States knows that their hegemonic control over the world is weakening, and when the bully feels threatened, they will always lash out. These are dangerous times, and we in the heart of empire must be brave in confronting this danger. In the same manner that civilians in Venezuela have identified and captured CIA agents on their streets, must be applied against armed agents of the state attempting to oppress people's development right here in New York City. We must take risks, and we must be steadfast in our revolutionary solidarity with all those struggling against imperialism and colonial domination. No war on Venezuela. Venceremos.
Thank you, Yoya from MASS in Brooklyn. We're next going to hear from Daniel from Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and several members of Freedom Road Socialist Organization were able to join the delegation, but many others were not.
Appreciate that. Warm and militant greetings all. My name is Daniel. I'm a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization in New York City. FRSO is proud to stand in solidarity with those gathered today as we condemn this latest escalation in Trump's agenda against the Venezuelan people. The Trump administration's criminal blockade and illegal GPS interference is a blatant attempt to isolate our comrades in Venezuela, to hide the truth about their struggle to build sovereignty and economic independence. Just as the Bolivarian Revolution has carried forward into the present, so too have the weapons of U.S. imperialism developed. But so too will the international anti-imperialist movement adapt to meet the urgent needs of the moment. Despite Trump's attempt at this no-fly zone, FRSO comrades were able to make it to Caracas from Seattle, Chicago, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Grand Rapids, and New York City. International solidarity is alive and well. We are excited to learn from what our comrades bring back from the People's Assembly, and those of us here will continue to build the fight against the repressive and racist Trump agenda. We say no to Trump and Hegseth's missile attacks and war crimes. We say no to U.S. war on Venezuela. We stand in proud and unwavering solidarity with the Venezuelan people, with the Bolivarian Revolution, with the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, and with the one and only president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. We join the hundreds of millions across Latin America and the Caribbean to say no volverá. FRSO is proud to fight in support of the people's movement in Venezuela and to fight as part of the people's movement around the world. Hands off Venezuela, down with imperialist war, and solidarity forever. Venceremos.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And just to say how important this no-fly zone is in shutting down, in an effort to shut down all of Venezuelan airspace. Now, there are more than 10,000 international flights that landed in Venezuela a year ago, and more in years before that. But the effort to shut down all transportation, except for some of the smallest flights, of course it impacted our delegation of more than 50 people. A handful did get through, and they have every right to travel to Venezuela, every right even legally to travel, and we expect that they will come back without government harassment or pressure. That's important, that we're there to defend their right to travel, the right to show solidarity. Today's event is really an assertion of our rights and the right of the Venezuelan people, most important, to sovereignty. There were actions organized from more than 100 actions nationally in November, actions again last week in December. All of that is across the country, a growing solidarity with the people of Venezuela. More than 70% of the population here is against any war with Venezuela, and every one of these acts are a war against Venezuela. There are thousands, tens of thousands really, of boats in the Caribbean, an area of 7,000 islands and 28 countries, and numerous boats. So to traumatize not only the people of Venezuela, but the people of the entire Caribbean with the threat of unknown drone attacks, no evidence, literal incineration, even coming back to make sure there's no survivors. That really is a war to terrorize Venezuela, but all the countries that have stood for decades with Venezuela and have their own assertion of sovereignty. So we are defending our rights to defend Venezuela and Venezuela's right to sovereignty, its right to its resources, its right to develop those resources for the entire population. This defense is an ongoing struggle, and one where international solidarity is a powerful weapon that we, in every sense, will use, will reach out to our sisters and brothers across the globe, to all of our siblings, always in solidarity, in defense, and in militant organization. And the people of Venezuela today are mobilized. A people's militia, millions strong, who are organized. A commune movement, millions strong, organized at the grassroots level. And it's that kind of mobilization which we're sure means venceremos. Thank you.